So today we will discuss idea of fundamental rights. An idea of fundamental rights in Indian Constitution and Indian polity. So before discussing idea of fundamental rights, let's discuss what is rights. What is rights? Why do we have rights? What rights gives to us? Let's explore this thing. So rights are certain claims we as an individual, we as a human, or we as a citizens have against the society or state. And these claims are justified claims. You cannot have unjustified claims against society, or maybe your family, or maybe the state. And this differentiates between the rights and privileges. Privileges are certain things which are unjustified. Maybe those are special rights given to certain peoples. But when we talk about rights, they fulfill the intrinsic worth of an individual. Let's talk about what are human rights. So my dear friends, Article 1 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that all human beings are born free and equal in rights and dignity. So when we say fundamental rights ensures that there are certain basic rights which are fundamental in nature and which fulfills as citizens the quest to lead a holistic life in a polity. And human rights, all human rights are not fundamental rights, but all the fundamental rights are human rights. So we as an individuals have an intrinsic worth, and that intrinsic worth give us a kind of leverage to enjoy certain rights. For example, if you are going और आपने देखा कि रोड के ऊपर कोई जानवर मरा पड़ा हुआ है, you won't find people coming and helping to move away that body. It's very rare. कई बार तो vehicles होते हैं कुचल के चले जाते हैं. So we do not see the intrinsic worth in an animal. But whereas if you see that a dead body is lying on the road, people come, they call ambulance, and they might even cover the body with certain clothes. So we attach that being a human, we have certain intrinsic worth, that is dignity. It makes us valuable, and that is why we enjoy rights being a human. So this is the most important thing. Rights give us fulfillment. We become more aware. We can develop our intellectual faculties by having rights. Right to freedom of speech and expression. We speak our mind. We share our ideas with the society. And that is why these rights are important for a human being. Let's discuss what are fundamental rights. Why certain rights are fundamental rights? And why do we need fundamental rights? But when we talk about fundamental rights, you must remember these rights are rights of citizens. The rights of citizens they enjoy in a particular polity, in a particular maybe democratic setup. And why these rights are fundamental in nature? Because without these rights, you cannot enjoy your life in a political structure in a full extent. You may feel suffocated if these rights are being taken away from you. आपको लगेगा कि आप एक fulfilled life जी ही नहीं रहे हो एक पॉलिटी के अंदर. That is why we say certain rights are very fundamental in nature and they should be protected. So there are two aspects of fundamental rights you should be knowing. The first thing, that fundamental rights are being secured in written constitution. They are clearly defined, they are entrenched, they are embedded in the constitution. And what does it mean? That these rights cannot be taken away by whims and fancies of a ruling dispensation. If the majority government think that we can change the fundamental rights, it's not that much easy. That is why these rights are being protected with certain mechanisms. And the second aspect is they are justiciable. If your rights are being violated, there is special mechanism by which you can claim that, see, my rights are being violated and I need certain redressal. So that redressal mechanism is already embedded in the constitution. So that when your rights are being violated, you can approach the certain courts. In Indian polity, we have Supreme Court and High Court, where you can approach to get remedies against your violation of your rights. But there are certain countries which specifically have certain benches or certain institutions which protects fundamental rights specifically. So we say these rights fundamental because they have certain safeguards which are already embedded in the constitution. They cannot be taken away by simple legislation. They need elaborate procedure for that. For example, in Indian context, after Krishnananda Bharti case, it is being said that okay, you can amend those fundamental rights, but you cannot take away the soul, the basic component of the rights, or maybe certain things which are embedded in the constitution. So that is why these rights are fundamental in nature. Now when we say that idea of fundamental rights, how it evolved in Indian polity, we go back to our Indian struggle for independence. That's the most important thing. So when in 1885, the Indian Congress was being established, its main objective was that to fight for certain rights for Indians. When we again go back to the idea of rights, it's some justified claims. When we being an individual, when we being a part of a community, we say that we justified in justified manners we ask certain rights because we are part of that particular community. We were Indians, we were natives, and the British government was ruling and they were denying us certain basic rights. The fight started from here only. That we need right to free speech. There was one document called Constitution of India Bill 1895, and it asked for certain rights. Right to free speech, right against arbitrary arrest. Certain things started evolving. A kind of awareness started coming into those freedom fighters who were fighting for our rights. There were so many petitions to the British government for certain rights. And now I am going to discuss certain things with you which are very much important. The first thing is that when the idea of constitutional development took place in India, our freedom fighters, they were very specific about that we should be given some rights. And it became very clear when any peasant in her Commonwealth of India bill, she specifically asked certain rights. We were not very concerned about full freedom that time. We were just asking certain rights so that we can, create certain kind of environment that we can speak, we can discuss, we can deliberate, we can create a kind of mass movement of sharing those ideas for independence. but we were being curtailed. If you remember that there was sedition being imposed on certain freedom fighters. Bal Gangadhar Tilak was being imprisoned for that. So these rights were being taken away from us. Even Gandhiji was saying that we should be having, India should be also being given the right to have arms. So this specific thing started from this. Then in 43rd Annual Congress session in 1927, it was being decided that a committee should be constituted to bring Swaraj Constitution, and that constitution should be based on Bill of Rights. And that Nehru committee was being constituted, and it brought certain rights. And the first thing Nehru committee noted that we would be able to enjoy the real freedom when these rights should be given to us. These should be basis of our independence, our constitutional reforms. And it talks about around 19 fundamental rights, and most of them, around 10 of them, is being directly or indirectly included in our present constitution. So again, we were treated as second-class human being during British times. The intrinsic worth was not being respected. If you remember, there were certain boards being hanged outside the restaurants and certain public places that dogs and Indians are not allowed it. That human dignity, that human respect was being completely absent. We were not being treated as citizens, just subject, equivalent to the animals. So this was the massive awareness which brought us together, and we were able to win our independence. Now, after talking this, let's discuss the Constitution as a social document and role of fundamental rights. So when I say Constitution as a social document, it means this document is directed to bring a social revolution. We all know that when we got independence, our India was divided into various segments, social segments: rich, poor, lower caste, upper caste, minority, majority. It is still there, but to some extent we are moving towards that final social revolution. So fundamental rights were being given so that we can bridge that gap of inequalities, and we provide certain security, certain sense of security to the citizens when they become part of this beautiful nation. I remember one scene from a movie, that Manji the Mountain Man. In that movie, the Manji, he comes from Calcutta or maybe Dhanbad after working few years, and that is the moment of celebration that we got independence. He comes to the village. There are certain high caste people, they are sitting there. He comes wearing new clothes and he shakes hands with them. Oh, how you are doing, and all those things. Then they said, who are you? We are not able to recognize you. Then he introduces himself that I am son of that particular person, and they immediately got very conscious that this person is from lower caste and he is shaking your hands and he is being very friendly with us. They started beating him brutally. Then he says that I heard that everyone is equal. It is being announced. And to his surprise, the thing happened, but it is not being materialized in our society. It is still there. So that social document was being emphasized to bring social revolution. And how this revolution will come when we know that we respect others' rights and when we enjoy our own fundamental rights. So this thing. Now, what is the role of fundamental rights in this social document? When we say fundamental rights and directive principle of state policy, these both things becomes conscience of the constitution. How and why we call these two things as a conscience of our constitution? So what is conscience? Conscience is inner voice that guides us to take some decisions. And when we ignore that, there comes a sense of guilty or crisis of conscience. So these are torch barrier. When we violate fundamental rights, even if it is the state or private individuals, so it creates certain kind of crisis of conscience. That is why they are being called conscience of the constitution. So when state forms certain policies, when state do certain things, it must keep these things in their mind. And we already say that directive principles are just a kind of guidance for the executive and legislature in the governance of the country. And when we explore the idea of fundamental rights in our constitution, we should be seeing that there are two types of rights: positive rights and negative rights. Positive rights, when states try to promote certain rights, actively participating to promote certain rights. For example, Article 21A, right to education. State does certain things, maybe bringing new schools, recruiting new teachers, providing infrastructure, and all those things. So, promoting RTE, fundamental right to education. And when we say about negative rights, in this state is having some negative injunctions that state cannot do certain things to violate the rights of citizens. I will give you one example. Recently, PIB created one fact check unit. So what is the function of this fact check unit? If anyone posts anything on social media and it comes to the notice of PIB, they can scrutinize that particular information and they can categorize it as a false news. So ultimately PIB become an arbitrator of truth, and it can violate the right of citizens. So fine, it is already in litigation. Bombay High Court gave a split decision on this thing, and I think it is in Supreme Court right now. Let's see what happens. But see, now it is negative injection on the state that you cannot violate rights of citizens. So we must explore those things altogether. Now the next thing is that fundamental rights, Article 12 and Article 13. So when we discuss Article 12 and Article 13, they are what I say the foundation of fundamental rights, all the fundamental rights. So why do we have these two dimensions? So when we're discussing that when we have fundamental rights, these are the rights against the state, or to some extent society as well, because Article 17 that is against private individual as well. So when we say most of our rights, our fundamental rights against the state, directly and indirectly. For example, state cannot violate our rights directly, or when someone is violating our rights, maybe private individuals or certain segment of society, state must actively participate not our right to be violated. So it is the direct and indirect role of the state to preserve our rights. So Article 12 define what is state. When we categorically identify that this is state, then only we can approach the grievance redressal authority, that is High Court or Supreme Court. So first thing is in the spectrum of fundamental rights is identifying what is state. And the definition of state has been evolving. It is not static. And there are several things which play a role into this thing. In 1991, when this LPG happened, with this liberalization, the role of state has been expanded, and several new authorities being embedded into this idea of state. So when any authority plays significant role of state, it is being considered as state. We will discuss this Article 12 when we are proceed to fundamental rights in a elaborative manner. So this identification is necessary. So you must be noticing that, for example, there is one example of Mahsa Amini. She was a lady in Iran. She was wearing her proper dress, but she did not cover her face with burqa. And she was being killed by morality police for violating this dress code. So Mahsa Amini was not being killed by that police. Police is part of state. The state killed Mahsa Amini. So you must understand this thing. Any organization which is working on behalf of state, and there is one Ajay Hasia case which has been giving elaborative ingredients that what can be called state. So we must know this thing. And if you see that certain cases in the Supreme Court for enforcing the fundamental rights, it is like Keshavananda Bharti versus State of Kerala, isn't it? So it's versus State of Kerala or State of Punjab or Union of India. So this is how it happens. When we talk about Article 13, it provides a mechanism that when state and its machinery or its instrumentalities, when they violate the right of citizens through executive action or maybe legislative action, those things can be held unconstitutional by Supreme Court or High Court, like High Courts. So this is the mechanism. If we do not provide constitutional remedies, these fundamental rights will be shallow. These are the mechanism which makes these rights as fundamental in nature, as we have already discussed. So, and to ensuring these rights, the Supreme Court and High Courts, specifically Supreme Courts, is the guarantor and protector of fundamental rights. So understanding entire spectrum of rights, these two components are most important. Then after that we have right to equality, right against exploitation and other such rights. So when we explore the idea of fundamental rights, we keep these two things in our mind. And when we explore all the other rights, you always remember you always focus on the concept, because some in these times UPSC is asking conceptual questions even in prelims and mains. And whenever any questions, any new development related to rights comes into the news, maybe is any kind of litigation going on Supreme Court or in any high courts, you must keep this in your mind, because nowadays in GS paper 2 they are asking about case laws. You have to mention case laws, so you be aware of this thing. You can use certain examples in ethics paper as well. You can use these in society paper as well. So this is something you should have very much clarity about this thing. So in next lecture we will discuss the fundamental rights in a very elaborative manner. Thank you so much.